Victoria Ray Henderson, the host of Listen Up Homebuyers, and very happy to have Tim Rohde Jr., the Vice President of Tomato Electric. He has 16 years in the trade, and Tomato Electric serves homeowners all around the Maryland, D.C., and Northern Virginia area. They specialize in residential and some commercial electrical work, but they do new homes, renovations, rewiring. They do entire houses, additions. They even will change a light bulb and do some repair work. So, Tim, thank you so much for joining me on Listen Up Homebuyers. It is such a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me.
I'm going to just dive in and ask you to give us a general overview. When people are coming up to a home, what is it that they should be looking for or looking out for in terms of electrical?
So it's kind of you would want to look at the main source is your electrical panel. That's kind of the heart of the home, what we call the heart of your electric. That's where everything's coming from and feeding out to all of your circuits throughout your house. So that's kind of the main point. See what condition it's in, if it has stickers or labels showing that it's been permitted, properly inspected. Um, you want to look for frayed wires or just something that it doesn't look. There's new homes and there's older homes with uh, different types of panels, meters. That doesn't really matter so much. It's more the condition that it's in. So you just want to take note of the wires and if they look newer, older, and that's kind of hard for some people to even know right offhand.
Yeah, including me, I will be honest.
Right.
I mean, I have a basic understanding because I've been on a lot of home inspections. So let's start at the beginning. I
Mhm.
go up to a house and I see the main power source that comes from the electrical service, and here it would be Pepco, BG&E, Dominion in Virginia. So
Yep.
you're talking about that exterior wire. Where does the electric company, the public service electric company begin, and your house electric, begin? Where? How do I know which is which?
So there's two different applications. One would be an overhead wire coming from either a pole or something overhead, um, and the other is underground. So you're looking for either a wire up top connecting to your house to what's called a point of attachment, or an underground pipe coming up to the meter base itself. You might not see any exposed wires itself, but that's where your power source starts.
Okay.
Um, yeah.
And so that shouldn't be frayed, obviously. And I have seen it look really tattered and pulled away. Is that the power company's problem or is that the homeowner's problem?
So most uh, most power companies will say anything up to the point of attachment, from the street to the point of attachment is their responsibility. Anything from the point of attachment touching the house, on the house, the meter base, the wire, everything else is the homeowner's responsibility. So that's another thing a lot of people don't understand is they see Pepco's supplying this meter on my house and they're charging me to pay for electric, but they don't realize that that's actually your responsibility, and you have to hire an electrician to take care of any issues that might result in needing to be fixed.
Okay. Okay, so now I'm going into a house and I'm thinking about houses when I'm touring with clients. And I'm walking in and I'm seeing outlets all around me.
Hmm.
And I know what a GFCI looks like, and I want you to tell us what that is. And I also can tell, most people can tell, when there's been some electrical work. So walk me through what would be a red flag or what are red flags for you when you're going into a home. What is it that you're looking for?
So a lot of the times you can kind of glance through your outlets, the receptacles on the wall. Some are the older style is the two-prong receptacle. They don't have that extra grounding receptacle or that spot for the ground. Um, so that's something that wants to be possibly addressed.
Mhm.
Um,
And tell me why. Just give everyone the information. Why would it matter to have something grounded?
So the ground is an extra protection that if there was an issue with the circuit, it's going to automatically trip that breaker that's back at your main electrical panel. Without that ground, there's no real path for electric to go back to the panel to say trip the breaker, and it could result in dangerous um, circumstances.
Yeah. So you could get electric shock. You could
Hmm.
fry a computer.
Yeah,
Have one of those explosive kind of moments.
exactly. Yeah,
Okay.
or
Okay.
damage equipment. Yes.
And why are GFCIs important in kitchens and bathrooms?
So GFIs are really meant to have that extra sort of quick trip protection. So if there was a fault to ground, it's gonna trip faster than a breaker would,
Mhm.
and it's more meant for unfinished spaces, garages, unfinished basements, crawl spaces, attics. And then around water sources, you have your sinks in your kitchen and bathrooms. Um, Wet bars, anything like that any countertop receptacle should be GFI protected, and any unfinished area should be GFI protected.
And so if I'm in my kitchen and theoretically I, have a sink full of dishes and I
Mm-hmm.
drop the toaster in the sink,
Mm-hmm.
chances are
It's
good.
gonna
Yeah.
Yeah, it should trip that GFI. If the GFI is functional, it should trip that GFI instantly before you even feel anything.
And that really comes to be very, very important for women in bathrooms when they're using blow dryers and things like that that could slip into a sink when it's wet or when there's water
Right,
in it. Yeah. Okay, tell me about some other things that I would be looking for in a home.
right. I would say trying to identify what kind of wiring you have in your home, whether it's aluminum or Romex, which is like a PVC coated outer jacket. That's the newer kind of wire. In older homes, you have BX, which is an armored cable, which some use, well, the BX, they use the ground. The outer jacket is the actual ground to that. So there's not an actual wire for the ground. So a lot of times we may want to even replace that depending on the conditions. There's different types of BX. Some has the cloth insulation inside of it, which can deteriorate and become brittle over time. So that's something you definitely want to have someone look at. There's also cloth
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
There's also cloth wiring, which is more of a kind of a cloth outer jacket instead of a PVC. It looks like Romex, but it's a cloth jacket. And the same thing, it kind of deteriorates over time, and it's flagged as one of those potential fire hazard issues.
Are there certain time periods when these things were used in construction? Like in the 60s, we could have expected to find this, in the 70s, this.
Yeah, I would say so. Cloth wiring. I don't know the exact time frames,
Right.
but definitely like the 30s to the 60s
Mhm.
was the time frame of BX and cloth wiring. So some of the cloth wiring doesn't have a ground in it. Some of it has a undersized ground. So it's kind of just, if you notice that it's not newer wiring, I would say call an electrician to at least have look at your main panel. You can tell a lot from a panel as far as how the house is wired, if the breakers are properly fused, what kind of wires in it, and just get an overall general sense of safety looking at the panel.
Okay, so when I walk up to a panel in a house and I open it, I
Mm-hmm.
typically see just a lot of slots with switches.
Yep,
I see
breakers.
wires, breakers, and I see wires coming out of the top.
Right.
Um, what am I looking at, and what would I be looking for that would be red flags in that situation?
So, so I would say panels with, uh, well, today's code, you're supposed to have a main breaker in your panel to shut off your whole house with one switch. That's common practice now that we can't install anything different. Previously, you could install what's called a split bus panel, which is it has six slots at the top to shut off possible breakers below, which means it's not necessarily just one switch to shut off everything. It's potentially up to six breakers to turn off to kill power, which is pretty important if there was an issue. If you had a fire or something, that's a lot of times what the fire department will come out, and the first thing they do is pull the meter or shut off the main switch. So it's just that extra time to turn off each breaker could be hazardous.
Yeah.
So as far as the what you're looking at the panel, you have some are old fuses where you have the screw-in fuses. That's obviously outdated and should be looked at, replaced. Breakers, there's multiple different brands, but you kind of just want to get an overall sense of does it look newer? Is there rust spots on it? Those are things to look at. And then the wires coming out of the panel, you can get a good sense of what kind of wires are there if you kind of look at what I was talking about before, the PVC jacket or the armored cable or the cloth wiring. Those are good indications of when your house was wired and what if it's been updated or the condition as now.
This is a good segue to go to the pictures that you have shared
Mhm.
from some of your recent inspections and recent, new installations that you've
Sure.
done. So I'm going to go ahead and share some pictures. And for those listening to the audio podcast, there'll be a link in the description of the podcast that you can go and you can see these pictures.
So this is an older meter base. You can see some rust on the top of it. It's been there a while. The newer meter bases, they're a little bigger than this. Typically, if they're about the same size as the meter itself, it's an older meter base. Usually, they're probably close to twice as big, the new ones.
Right.
Also, what you can see is if you look at the wire itself coming in and out of the meter base, you can see that the wire is frayed. The jacket has kind of been deteriorated by the sun and weather. So that's something that it's about time to replace it and upgrade the service to be proper and adequate so that you don't have any issues with power loss or potential fire issues with that.
Now, would this be the public service company replacing this?
So anything that touches the house again would be the responsibility of the owner. So even though I know it's on the top side of the meter, it goes probably up to an overhead service, but the electrical company would be responsible, or homeowner would be responsible to pay an electrical company to replace this wire up to that point of attachment.
All right, that's picture number one. What are we looking at in here in picture number two?
So that is a new install done by us. It was either to replace an existing service or upgrade an existing service. It looks like either a 350 or a 400 amp service. So this is kind of newer wiring and
neat and tidy, everything over here.
Yep.
On the side.
Yeah, and that's ideally that's what a panel should look like on the inside. It's not always practical, especially with dealing with when you're replacing wires, older wires. You can't always get it to line up like that, but when running new wires, it's nice to be able to keep everything nice, clean, and be able to, for the next person to come in to work on it and physically see what's going on.
Yeah, good job. Oh boy. Okay, what are we looking at here?
So this is a fuse panel. It's got the screw-in type fuses. It's an older style, and so instead of circuit breakers that you can manually turn on and off, there's fuses in this panel. They will trip if there's an issue in your house, but every time they trip, then you have to replace the fuse. They're bad after a trip. Okay. So you can't just reset it. You have to have replacement fuses on hand. The connections, the terminations are not real tight on these, so eventually they do wear out and go bad, and that's why a lot of fuse panels have just been kind of put off as obsolete.
How about right now, if my client is buying a house and I open up the panel and see this, I mean, everything is fixable, right? But how scary is this? I mean, is the house safe with this kind of wiring?
So the wiring itself, it kind of depends on the wiring itself behind the wall and in the panel. The safetiness of the fuse panel, yes, I would say you should replace it.
This looks so familiar to me. I see this all the time. What are we looking at?
Yep. So that is again a split bus panel. It has no main breaker. The top 6 spaces are for your main shutoffs. You can see that uh, the the breakers, if you shut off all the top breakers, it would kill power to below. Um, but it's still an older style panel. Should be updated with a newer main breaker, so you have one switch to turn off the main if there was an issue. What I would want to mention here is the type of wires going into it. You can see that it's all the PVC coated jacket. It's obvious to me it's newer wiring. Everything looks nice, tidy, neat going into the panel. And that kind of just gives you an idea as to the workmanship that was done on the job. It's if it's nice and tidy on the outside, it's probably nice and tidy on the inside. It's probably looking good throughout the entire house.
Okay.
It doesn't always reflect that, but it gives you a good sense of who did the wiring and the workmanship behind it.
Okay. Is it imperative that we see a sticker on this panel that says the work was done by a licensed electrician?
Yep, that's correct. And that's pretty common. They're not always left on the panel, but if an inspection did happen, most of the time the past sticker and a date signed by an inspector is put directly on the panel to reflect what was done, whether it was a heavy up or a panel change or maybe even other wiring throughout the house.
Yeah. What are we looking at here?
Okay, so looks like a new service that was done. Looks like 200 amp. It has an approved sticker below. You can see the ground wire on the bottom side coming into it, showing that it goes out to the ground rods. The newer SE cable. So that's kind of what you want to look for is the bottom wire coming into the panel that feeds your main panel. That's SE cable, and that's kind of what it should look like, not the frayed stuff that we saw previously.
Right.
That's got the good outer jacket, PVC coated. That's UV light resistant, and it's just a better grade wire than what they used to have. If you do see rust in your panel, I would consult somebody who's more professional in like waterproofing company, something like that, to make sure that the at least water issue has been resolved. Because obviously you don't want water in your panel. So, but rust shows either humidity, condensation buildup, or actual water coming from somewhere sitting in the panel or something.
What are we looking at here, Tim?
So this is an example of cloth wiring. The more middle ones, the black one is a Romex type wire, so it's got that PVC coating on the outside, kind of better protects the wire. The cloth wiring is kind of next to that to the left. The green, the whitish color, that's all cloth. Yep, and you can see it's kind of under that staple. It's just deteriorated from either moving back and forth, or so it's just the outer jacket is deteriorating away. If you're doing kitchen remodels or bath remodels, try to get rid of any of that old wiring that you can while it's open. That's the easiest time to get rid of it.
Tim and I just went through some really, really valuable pictures for anybody who wants to better understand electrical wiring in the house. So if you're listening to the podcast, I'll provide a link to the video so you can see those pictures. And Tim, you did a great job covering that. But I have a few more questions for you.
Sure.
I've been in homes, particularly it seems like in Annapolis, where there is a lot of aluminum wiring. Can you talk to me about that?
So aluminum wiring is a potential hazard. Well, what companies used to do would be they ran the wire throughout your whole house, so it would go from plug to plug to plug to switch to light. And receptacles aren't rated to have an aluminum wire terminated on them. So there's a couple ways to fix it. Again, you could replace the wiring throughout your house as needed. Use special wire nuts that you can put aluminum to copper wire nuts and have a tail come out to properly put a copper wire on the receptacle. The issue with aluminum wiring is over time, after using certain devices, you put loads on the devices or circuits, and the aluminum wiring heats up, it expands and contrasts all the time, and it'll eventually loosen up, and that's where you get your potential fire hazard.
Any other kind of wiring that people should look out for that was used in the past, other than what you've covered already?
Yeah, I would just touch on the BX wiring again. That's the armored cable. It has the metal jacket around it. There's two types pretty much of BX wiring. The cloth wiring that's actually inside there, which again, it becomes brittle and deteriorates over time. I've been to jobs where you touch it and it kind of just crumbles in your hand. There's also the some BX wire has a PVC coating of insulation on it. So those, it's still not ideal. It doesn't have that extra ground wire in it, but it does use the outer jacket. So as long as your outlets are properly grounded, it should give you that protection of ground. Maryland passed a law a few years ago saying you have to have a certain amount of smoke detectors in your house. And if you didn't, you need to install at least the 10-year sealed battery smoke detectors in the appropriate locations. The locations are for code purposes. It's one on each living level and one in each bedroom. If you're wiring a house today, they all would need to be interlinked, but they kind of base it on when the house was built, what you have currently, and then bring it up to at least the minimum of today's standard, which is putting some sort of smoke detector in there.
Tim Rohde Jr. is the vice president of Tomato Electric. He has 16 years in the trade. And Tim, thank you so much for joining me on Listen Up Homebuyers. It's been a real pleasure.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.